Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I know it's after lunch, but let's get some energy in this room. All right. Thank you for being here. My name is Anton Fajardo. I'm a partner at McKinsey and Company. My focus in general is technology, technology innovation, technology transformation. Been doing this for about 20 years, so seen a lot of evolution of these things. And I'm really excited about what's going on in the space today. There's very few times, every 10 years we see a big cycle in technology, and it transforms the way we work, the way we live, the way we raise our children, and this is one of them. This is, has a big potential here, but it is a very confusing space. It's probably the most confusing one we've ever been in. If you think about the previous ones, it was web, right? If you go to a browser, do stuff. 2 was cell phones. It was easy to explain, right, to anybody. You get a phone and make a call and use stuff. Web 3 is a little more complicated, so we have a very interesting panel here. And it is a controversial topic. It is a very complex topic, and everybody has a different view. So we're going to start with some quick introductions here. And one thing that I've learned with this is if you ask 80 people what Web3 means, you're going to get 79 answers. So we're going to go real quick here and just some quick introductions. And in one sentence, what is Web3, if that's possible?
A marketing tool. I'm Genevieve Leveille, and I'm the CEO of Agriledger. We've worked with building a blockchain solution in Haiti with the government of Haiti and the World Bank, working with smallholder farmers.
My name is Cenk Sidar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Enquire AI that provides real-time insights to the world's leading enterprises. I'm Web 2.5 guy rather than Web 3 guy because my company is a Web 2 company, but we have aspirations for Web 3, and we are moving to that direction because we have a community-based network. And my Web 3, I kindly agree with you. I think Web 3 has a huge potential, and the way I explain is, I think very simple. I think it will be a good start for the audience. Web 1 is when you read. It's a 1996 Netscape browser when you read AOL and you read the news. Web 2 is 2004 Friendster or Facebook 2006. You read, you write. Write means engage, like, post, comment, and engage with the platform. Web 3 is you read, you write, engage, and you own. When you engage with the platform, you get awarded through the tokenization system or somewhere else. So Web 3 provides collective ownership and creating communities around same interests and similar interest levels and areas. So that's why I believe the transition to Web 3 will be very potentially rewarding for enterprises and communities in next decade or so.
And my name's Daniel Barsky. I'm a partner at Holland & Knight. I'm also adjunct at the University of Miami School of Law, where I'm the co-director of the Startup Clinic. Kind of trying to tie it back to the original idea of kind of, talking about kids and family a little bit there. I think Web3 is it's the next evolution of how we've moved through what, when I was in high school and middle school, was an emerging technology, Web 1.0, and we all created GeoCities, web pages that, nothing but multiple spinning multicolored balls on that was very exciting. I kind of see Web3 as the new application of new technology to existing structures that's going to change those structures and be what my son, my 5-year-old, is going to think of as the internet when he's older.
So as you see, like three very different answers. I'm going to give you my own. My day-to-day life is how do I make enterprises work and perform better? And at the end of the day, to me, is how do I make these organisms that are independent work nicely together, right? So if you notice the focus of each one of 4 of us, we're going to give you our spin and our angle on it, from the implementer that actually tried to do this thing, which is very hard, and realize there's a lot of things that are really hard to do and implement and roll out, to the content guy that is focused on discovering content for you as ownership, and the lawyer, right? So you have 3 different perspectives here, right? So one thing that I think the 4 of us and all of us can agree is that regulation is a big concern, right? The reason why it has been widely adopted is regulation. And there's a very somewhat nascent or old, depending how you look at it, in Web3 terms, concept of DAOs, right? So if you think about DAOs, also you can get very different answers, but I think there's a very common definition of it. So maybe, Cenk, you want to maybe explain what a DAO is and why it's important?
Sure. Is a decentralized autonomous organization. Again, is an evolving subject. There are so many conversations in the Web3 community about what a DAO is, what is a successful DAO is, what is a inclusive and efficient DAO is. But basically, DAOs are providing its participants voice and governance and ownership. Again, ownership is my keyword for Web3. For engaging in certain activities or business or non-profit cause. And again, the regulation of DAOs is a major subject going forward. But my experience as a tech CEO is like regulation is always a couple steps behind the technology innovation. I think it's kind of unrealistic to expect congressmen or women in DC or other federal legislations to understand what's happening in the sector. So it's gonna take some time. But I'm more, maybe I can answer that or I can talk about it later, but most important thing is how we make Web3 efficient and make sense so that you use a blockchain version of something rather than Web2 version. That's a major challenge. That's why that kind of paradigm changing technologies take a lot of time to catch on.
Genevieve?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things about Web3, I was saying marketing, but in reality, it's the integration of many of the technologies we've been working on for the last, I'd say, 10, 15 years. Because you have IoT, so Internet of Things. You also have in there coming in the metaverse, which people think is new, but it's not really been. So is it an AR or VR sort of experience? And all those things coming in to sort of enrich the ability that we have to communicate and to work with one another in very far places. So this is where the trust comes in, that you can now have a virtual reality environment where people can train. And then the challenge I have for DAO right now is like everything else, it's the gold rush. And it's like everybody going to California looking for gold, then realizing that they could stay there because it was beautiful weather compared to the East Coast. And that's where we're going to see where it's going to stabilize when there's no longer as much money to be made. For me, I think there's a great opportunity in data. So we talk about data being the new oil. Where did this data come from? Who created the data? Who enriched the data? Is where now we're seeing this idea of semantic DAO, to where you and I participate and the final product then looks at how much did we contribute to this amount without creating any kind of conflicts. So this is where I think there's an opportunity, and also you're going to see more, and this will not be successful until we have enterprise getting involved. And the enterprise have to feel secure that they are going to be treated fairly. So right now we have a little bit of a wild, wild west, but I think that we will see along the line benefits coming out of this.
Thank you. Daniel, how do you see, what is your definition of DAO, and how do you see changing the law profession in general and IP?
Well, for right now, for me, the definition of DAO is a headache a bit, because there's a lot that is still very uncertain. And just kind of playing off what the other panelists have said, you have a nascent technology that is pretty unregulated, and there's a lot of open questions about how, as attorneys and just forgetting even being an attorney, how does this work, right? When somebody comes to me and says, Dan, I've got an idea, I want to start a company. Okay, well, do you want it to be a corporation? Do you want it to be an LLC? Do you want it to be a LP or an LLP? You create the documents necessary to set it up, and there's governance structures, and there's very highly developed law that exists around the world, certainly across the United States, that governs how that should work. If somebody comes to you and says, well, I want to start a DAO, there's a whole bunch of questions that you have to figure out. What does that formation document look like? What are the rules, right? Let's say we're all a DAO. Everybody in this room, we're going to be a DAO for whatever purpose we decide. How are we going to set that up? What's the structure? Where is it going to be formed anywhere? Or is it just going to come into being? Is the data, like Genevieve was saying, it's just going to materialize? Are we all going to create it? How are we going to govern ourselves? How are we going to protect ourselves? Let's say, again, everybody in this room is a DAO. How are we going to prevent somebody from walking through that door back there and taking all of our stuff, or infiltrating us and starting to manipulate how the entity works? What happens if the entity does something that's considered illegal or improper? What happens if one member of the DAO says, oh, I've got an issue with what happened here and I want to try to sue the DAO? Who do you sue? What do you sue? How do you serve process? There's all these questions remain to be answered. So that's why, tongue in cheek, I say a DAO right now for me is a bit of a headache, because the number of questions that we have to answer about how this is going to work, we really haven't seen in terms of just structure, organization, rules, basic functioning. We haven't seen these issues in a very long time and had to grapple with all of them all together to make these things work. And if you look at the short history of DAOs, you'll find that the landscape is littered with failed DAOs, hacked DAOs, hundreds of millions of dollars having been absconded from DAOs, people trying to get that money back, forking the DAO, regulatory issues. It's really a very difficult situation right now, and is really testing the technology itself isn't as much of a problem as all the other issues involved whenever you get a bunch of people together to try to engage in a collective activity.
So I think what we're getting at here is that there is obviously this Web3 utopia where we have a concept of it decentralized and free for all and beautiful, right? And there's a lot of people that are purists, that they believe in and die on the sword in this. There's another camp of the legal profession and governance and government functionaries, right, that are looking to, yes, adopt the technology, but add a governance layer to it. I don't think we can get away from, it's not going to be a binary thing, right? Because nobody can stop the decentralized community from building on it. But there will be some that are governed, and people will probably gravitate towards the governed and non-governed, right, to your point. Cenk, just to reset a little bit the discussion here, can you provide maybe an example of a Web3 platform and a DAO, how would it work in very practical terms? And then maybe you can explore a little more around it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, again, it's an emerging topic. And maybe one final thing that I would add to Dan's comment, I totally agree. Every emerging technology, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, quantum computing, is bringing governance or legal issues to the table. We're talking about AI ethics, how AI would make a decision on it. So every emerging technology has this uncertainty, and the market dynamics or legal dynamics determine the future of that technology in the near future. So I think we are in the very early days of Web3, and we will see how these things evolve. So again, the example I will give to that is, again, not fully regulated, so no one knows how successful it will be. But I give that example just to provide a great example how, between a traditional corporate entity and a DAO. For instance, Uber, the ride-sharing company, is a great Web2 company that made it efficient for everybody, to take rides from location A to B. And many people, many drivers of Uber, make their living driving cars. But they don't own Uber. They cannot get shares of Uber every time they take a ride. Uber tried to do that, but SEC regulation didn't allow to provide shares when Uber went public, I think 6 years ago. But now there's a new DAO, is former employees of Uber created Uber DAO, but they call it, I think, something as transport DAO or something like that. And that gives Uber or ride-sharing drivers an opportunity to earn tokens every time they take a passenger from location A to B and earn company shares. So they can use that shares, they can exchange it, in a crypto market and get US dollars for the ride they gave, or they can keep accumulating it and they can take ownership of it. So that is not fully tested yet, but they're building it. But what I want to say is, which company will be more successful? A company that gives its main drivers of the growth, in this case, the main drivers access and ownership, or a company is that managed by the elite group of executives. And the panel's name is very interesting because we're talking about rebuilding trust. Technically, Web 2 broke the trust. I mean, look at all the giant companies like Meta, Microsoft, Amazon. There's a lot of resistance against those companies because, when you use those services, you give your data. When you use Web 3 platforms, you also get something back, the ownership. So that's why I think the Uber DAO would be an interesting example, and the same with Airbnb. And all the Web 2 examples could be built on a Web 3 foundation around a DAO, or whatever you call it in the next legal terminology. But I think that's exciting.
I'd like to actually say that we're focusing on one part of Web3, which is DAO right now. Part of this is really the peer-to-peer ability to do it with trust and understanding what the infrastructure is going to be. Very interesting, a couple of days ago, Google announced their foray in creating blockchain nodes. So what we're seeing is it's really how our data is stored and how our data is shared and who's making the money from there. And my challenge is to say, if I have my data and nobody else wants it because I'm not famous, it has no value. The shared value is actually going to be in other people's data plus my data to then be able to have insightfulness, which is going to drive that commerce. At the end of the day, it is about the value which is paid for something. So unless I'm a famous star, nothing to do with my data. But once, or an influencer, those are the people who are making money on their data. Obviously, Facebook and others are making money from our data because they're putting it all together and getting insight of our behaviors and pushing it back to us. Now, Web3 may, and I say may, allow for this to where we can then track when my data is being used and have this idea. And for those who don't know what smart contract is, it's an algorithm which basically keeps track and says if X happens, Y needs to happen, and then pays me back part of this residual. Where we get at is really more this concept of shared values, being able to have, and this is what's missing. So this idea of tokenization is really around shared value. The company makes a lot of money, doesn't share with the people working. Now we can actually be able to systematically take care of those things. That's the utopia, and I hope we can make it a reality.
So when you mentioned sharing of data, right, and all these technologies and underlying infrastructure that's required, we see a lot of innovation happening in the layer 2, layer 3, right? That's where there's interesting actually happening. And I'm asking the three of you, do you really need that layer 1 if you're innovating at the layer 2 and 3, which probably can use traditional infrastructure and technologies?
It depends. I wouldn't, no, I use Corda. So you could use, so there is two technologies, Hyperledger, which is IBM, and Hyperledger, which basically gives you, so you, I can't remember the foundation. And also you have R3 Corda. Corda has been doing a lot around the CBDC, which is central bank digital currency, and also the banks. Those are more private permission blockchains versus what you have are public blockchain. And for me, because of that, you still need that layer 1 for governance, because you need to have the infrastructure be, it's like having that building. If you don't have a solid building, it doesn't matter what you build inside of it, it could crumble. So those layer 2, layer 3 are ways of bringing it further, but you will need to have that infrastructure in place.
Yeah, so an example would be credit cards, right? I can get my credit card, my wallet, pay for something, it just works perfect, right? Like, why do I need something else? But if you look at, for example, mobile payment, right? Apple Pay, it just exploded. It's been around for almost 10 years at this point, and only has had real adoption in the last 2 or 3 years. How long do you guys think it would take for Web 3.0 to be a reality, and when can we actually plant the flag and say it is a reality?
I mean, interesting, like given a few examples. Washing machines invented before World War I. And they were only in more than half of the US household after 50s. Dishwashers were invented like in 30s and only 40s, and only they became like a household item after 90s in every house. So like technology takes time, but the exciting thing about Web3 is Web3 is not a luxury item. It's really changing the foundation. So another example, like cryptocurrency ownership has been increasing on a compounded average of 110% every year in the United States. There's much faster adoption than Web 1. 14% of US citizens own cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency is basically one great example of, or use case of Web3, right? I mean, Web3 is such a large, broad subject. So it's going to take time, but Web3 has a lot to learn from Web2 and the mistakes Web2 made. Again, I talk about the positive sides of it, but I'm also realistic. A lot of things to solve. I mean, I think Web2 companies made a lot of mistakes. Web3 ecosystem is still very isolated. Still has a lot of way. I mean, like even purchasing an NFT takes 4 or 5 steps. It's not efficient. You cannot just go and connect your wallet or build it. So it takes time. It's still difficult for a average citizen to go and purchase an NFT, which is NFT is not a perfect example, but there's one transaction in the Web3 world. So a lot of way to go. I believe it's going to take some time, as any other paradigm changing technology.
Yeah, I was going to say I think it's going to take quite a while, frankly. When you look at the time it took to go from, say, Web 1 to Web 2, right? You went from essentially, look, all I can do is read this web page to, oh, look, my web page now has a login function, and I can log in, I can customize it, I can post some content to it. That's a much, I think, conceptually easier transition for most people to make than to go from the concept of Web 2, what people are comfortable with of how the internet works now, to this much more abstract, much more difficult, I think, to comprehend structure of, look, it's all decentralized. You need to get a wallet. Your wallet's going to have this super long string of characters. And by the way, when you get your new iPhone, you're going to lose your wallet because it's tied to that, and you've got to make sure you've got everything backed up. And then you've got to go through, and you're going to have all these different networks, and here's how you log in with your wallet to digitally sign something. It's going to take all these steps to buy an NFT. I mean, I have clients that I've helped do NFT drops, and I thought, you know what, I'll just go buy one, with the drop because it's my client. I've helped him out. I'll participate, et cetera. And just to try to get through all the counterfeit and all the fraud out there with the basic NFT drop was difficult for me. And I knew what was going on. I had helped, them plan everything out. So for the average person who's not sitting there and working on that, it's rife with fraud. It's rife with counterfeits. It's very complicated concepts. And I think we're going to see it take quite a while for us to get from a Web 2 reality really into a Web 3 reality because of these changes. It took a long time to get from Web 1 to Web 2.
I am going to say something different. I think we will see the Greater South getting there faster. We forget that mobile technology actually started in Africa, and they will leapfrog because what this does give is infrastructure without need of having to build infrastructure. Your internet is, your cloud computing makes it possible then to raise. So what I do is really helping people in those countries be able to communicate with the West without having to be there, and to be assured, to assure the West that, because one of the challenges is, let's say in general, agricultural practices, there are doubts. Are they doing what's supposed to be done? Now you'll be able to evidence that information or the manufacturing and then sell it and then be able to have that distribution. Now, as you guys have said very well, the UI UX is what has to change. Until we fix the UI UX, it's going to be problematic. But also the beauty of this is that it is able to, if we ask the communities what are they looking for, we stop making this assumption that everyone needs to have a smartphone. They just need communication. So SMS messages sometimes work better, then we can see an adoption. My view is that we're going to have an adoption in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and then we'll see it come back to Europe and to America and them owning it.
No, and I agree. When I'm talking about taking a long time, I'm talking about universal or overall adoption. I agree with you completely that I think below that top level, we could see countries that have traditionally lagged behind in adoption of current internet technologies. I think we can see an inversion there, like you're suggesting, and all of a sudden, these countries that have been in regions that have been potentially laggards now become cutting edge forefront of this technology.
And also talking about the trust factor, within our organization. So as you mentioned, citizens of emerging markets trust cryptocurrencies more than their national currencies, so especially in today's economic environment where you deal with the inflation, where you deal like macroeconomic uncertainties, geopolitical risks, having certain, and if you look at the again, I'm not really the crypto guy. I'm more interested in the foundation. But if you look at the Bitcoin, Ethereum, or five leading cryptocurrencies and how they did against traditional stock markets, they kept their value much better than top technology companies, where like Meta lost about 60% of its value. Google, Microsoft, they faced through significant turbulence. They face significant turbulence. So that may be an interesting factor, how people would trust more in decentralized systems going forward.
So on that topic, completely agree with you, right? That in developing markets, there's a lack of trust in the system, lack of governance, that this could actually improve it and leapfrog what the adoption is happening in the West, right? And developed countries in general. But in developed countries, we do have legal frameworks. We have trust in the system. We have a over governance at times. So I would love to get back to Daniel, to you, and ask you, if you had to litigate a case today about a stolen NFT, do you feel like you have the proper knowledge, understanding from our legal system to be able to litigate and properly and be able to come out on the right side of the case?
Yeah, in something as simple as an NFT, I think the answer is pretty clearly yes. I think my firm has proven that, even with complicated issues like how do you serve somebody that you don't know, if somebody hasn't doxed themselves and you don't know who that defendant is. And a lot of these are, we keep talking about decentralization, but the reality is a lot of NFTs, for example, go through centralized places, right? Like OpenSea, and they have, you can go to OpenSea and say, freeze this asset, and then they can jump it to a different chain, or they jump it to a different, a different marketplace. But again, it's still very centralized, right? I don't know what any of your wallet addresses are. You don't know what any of mine are. I can tell you one of mine is debarsky.eth. So there, I just told you what but you only know one. You don't know how many wallets I have. And so if I'm looking to buy, I want to buy an NFT from one of my co-panelists up here. I can't just sit there and figure out who they are. I've got to go to a centralized place. And so there is still centralization. It is still possible to litigate. I will tell you, one of the interesting things is the community response, right? When OpenSea freezes an asset that's stolen, and we've seen this with, for example, Seth Green, there have been some others, particularly in the Bored Ape space, that have been stolen. We've seen massive community blowback. And taking it just from pure litigation, but also transactional, when I've worked on Web3 and blockchain transactions, a critical element you have to think about is the community. And how are you going to keep the community engaged? You don't want blowback from people when you say, well, here's a new owner, we're going to do this. Oh, that's governance. We don't want that. When you go to OpenSea, for example, and you say, hey, this asset was stolen, freeze it, they get a bunch of blowback. And you have to navigate those issues very carefully. But at the end of the day, when it comes to something as simple as litigating, when I say simple, a stolen NFT is a much more simple, in most respects, issue to litigate than a lot of the other things. Like if you told me, go sue a DAO, right? That's a much more difficult, question to answer, a much more difficult problem to solve at the present time than if you say, hey, my Bored Ape was stolen.
And we'll go to Genevieve for in a second here. Is this these discussions, let's say, they happen in a private forum or do they actually go to a public court of law?
I mean, both, right? I mean, internally at my firm, we talk about this. This is stuff that, people that work in this space, we talk about internally. And certainly it's something that there are a lot of people that are trying to address in a public forum. I'm on the Florida Bar's UCC Article 12 committee where we're trying to figure out, okay, what should be the new, what do we propose as new Florida legislation and how do you obtain security in some of these transactions? If you want to make sure that as a bank, or a private speaker is talking about bank, if you want to make sure your loan is secured. So it's a mixture of both.
So if you strongly believe in governance and oversight on Web3 in general, what are some of the key aspects do you feel like we have to govern and regulate?
Identity is going to be a big one. So one of the things that we just heard about was multiple addresses. The other thing is like these DAOs, how do you protect the community itself also from bad actors, and that bad actor coming into one community, getting kicked out and going to another community. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to have some sort of digital identity or markers. I don't think the technology is there yet, and also the mindset is not there. But, we talk about protecting children on the internet. This could be worse because you really don't know who, what, and where that person is coming from because you're giving them the opportunity for anonymity. So we need our government and regulators to understand so that they don't overregulate, but also making the right choices to protect our citizens.
Cenk?
Look, there's definitely hype about Web3, blockchain, crypto. There's a lot of, again, people jumping on the subject. But that happened in 90s. There was a dot-com crash. There were like so many failed startups in late 90s, and some of them survived, and they built the Web 1 and Web 2. There's always a natural selection, and there's evolution. So I think it's normal. We're going to be facing a lot of failed DAOs, a lot of failed cryptocurrencies, a lot of ROGs, they call it in the sector, or a lot of fraud. But at the end, this is a foundational technology. Blockchain provides inclusion, more engagement, and ownership to participants. And that's a major trend. I think that will transform the way business will be conducted in the next decades. And I think we will be living with Web3 and whatever you call it. I mean, I think we are in the Web 2.5 space right now, which is great because we can learn from both areas and we can prepare the next evolution of internet that can create trust among participants because we lost trust. No one trusts us anymore to Meta or Google or Amazon, and they've been consolidating their markets and they're having your data. They know everything about you. When you felt sick, when you had a date with your girlfriend or boyfriend, this is, and that's more scary than a centralized company that has access to my data. I would probably prefer, in the ideal world, that decentralized ledger system would have that data that no one can access through certain restrictive measures.
And one last question for the three of you. There's a lot going on right now with a crypto winter, and now if you look at Meta itself, with $1 billion that invest into the metaverse, and the investor pressure to move away from it, stock value, right? There's a lot going on at the same time that's questioning and pressuring the system. Do you feel like it's going to survive?
Definitely. I mean, it's not, the whole blockchain thing, we think it's new. It's not new. It's been going on for a while. I kind of laugh because I started the internet in the early 90s before we had, and the evolution of it is amazing what we see today. It's going to take time, as was said by my fellow members on panel, but this whole idea of being able to securely store data is not going away.
I don't think it's going away, and I think this is frankly a good thing. I think we needed crypto winter to take a lot of froth out of this. I think we need to, look, there will be bodies on the floor here. I think that's probably a good thing. We've seen this time again, going back to the early .com days. pets.com, right? I mean, we all remember the puppet. And look, today we have, chewy.com to, somewhat local company. So I do think it's a good thing. I think it's a necessary thing. And I think that the industry will survive and come out stronger on the other end.
All right. Thank you all for listening to us, and thank you for this amazing panel. Thank you.